the fundamentalist controversy per se goes on, in my understanding, at two levels. There's a denominational level and there's the national level. The national level we don't need to talk about a whole lot because it involves the Scopes trial and William Jennings Bryan in Dayton, Tennessee, and the prosecution against John T. Scopes for teaching evolution contrary to Tennessee state law. Now, of course, that story in some ways also involves the Presbyterian controversy, because William Jennings Bryan was an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and he actually asked Machen to testify at the Scopes trial, which Machen declined, said he wasn't an expert in Old Testament, in the Old Testament, which he wasn't, but it was kind of a dodge because I don't think he really wanted to testify there at that trial. I think he knew it wasn't going to turn out well. So it's not as if you can keep these two things distinct. But in Presbyterian circles, and I hope we go back to the origins of the book, but in Presbyterian circles, the controversy started really in 1922 when Harry Emerson Fosdick fired the first shot. He preached a sermon at First Presbyterian Church. I think it was First. It might shall the Fundamentalists win? He sort of said these fundamentalists were bad Christians for trying to exclude other people from the church. He highlighted the ideas of inerrancy, but also premillennial dispensationalism. And from there, then Presbyterians began to respond to a modernist preaching in a Presbyterian church. Fosdick was one of the leading modernists of the era, one of the most popular preachers of the era. He was also a Baptist. So there was a real anomaly of a Baptist preaching in a Presbyterian church. So there are any number of issues that Presbyterians could raise objections to. And so conservatives in the Presbytery of New York raised objections. Clarence McCartney, who was a prominent conservative in Philadelphia, also issued a statement against Fosdick. And from there, you had a series of skirmishes at the local Presbytery level that reached up to the national level with the General Assembly, back and forth in 1923, 24, 25, with great hopes put in who would become the moderator of the General Assembly. Conservatives won that vote in 1924 with Clarence McCartney becoming moderator. But this was a church, too, that had a big bureaucratic machinery, and it would be hard for someone just in office, and their moderators did actually stay in office the whole year. It wasn't just for the duration of the assembly, to change the church. So McCartney didn't do much. 1925, though, was the real turning point, at least as it relates to Machen and confessional Presbyterianism. Charles Erdman, a colleague of Machen at Princeton, was the moderator. There had been a series of resolutions to affirm the virgin birth and 4 other doctrines like the atonement as essential doctrines for the church, necessary and essential doctrines, which goes all the way back to the language of subscription in the Adopting Act of 1729. It's a peculiar wrinkle in American Presbyterian history, and we don't need to get into the weeds, but still it was possible for the church to affirm necessary and essential articles of faith. The church was ready to reaffirm that in 1925 again. Liberals in New York who had ordained 2 men who would not affirm, it wasn't that they denied the virgin birth, but they would not affirm the virgin birth. Liberals were worried. They thought they might have to leave the church. Instead, Erdman appoints a committee. This is different. It's a different Erdman. There's only 1 E in Charles Erdman as opposed to the publisher, which is 2 E's. He appoints a special committee to investigate, and that leads eventually to, in my estimation, a whitewashing of the controversy in the church, pretty much blaming conservatives for becoming too belligerent, which then leads to another committee to investigate the controversy at Princeton, because Erdman was a faculty member. Machen was a faculty member. People thought something was going on at Princeton, and something was going on at Princeton, although I think it still remained fairly civil on campus. And that led to a report that recommended administrative changes to the structures of governance at Princeton Seminary in 1929, which basically meant the board of trusts, the board of directors, which was responsible for the theological content, for the faculty content of the seminary's program, was now, it had been majority conservative board of directors. It became now minority conservative board of directors. And it was at that point that Machen decided with other conservatives to found Princeton Seminary. Sorry, Westminster Seminary in 1929 in Philadelphia. And then you had a bit of an interlude. Conservatives, the way I read it, didn't know what to do because they had lost. They had, they started a seminary, but it's sort of like starting a seminary in I don't know what the equivalent would be, say a new seminary in the CRC or something. What would you do? What
in the Great Depression too? I mean,
right. But what do you do as outsiders to try to minister in a church that you think has basically gone liberal? And then in 1932, a report on Protestant foreign missions comes out called Rethinking Missions, which really questions whether missionaries should be involved in preaching the gospel to save people from going to hell. And it advocates a much more humanitarian posture for Protestant foreign missions. Machen opposes that, gets into a series of struggles for that. He's eventually brought to trial in 1935 for, again, being belligerent and being a fighter, for questioning his peers in the faith, for not showing loyalty to the church, even the charge of lying, breaking the ninth commandment for lying about fellow ministers. And that leads to an appeal to overturn his conviction by the Presbyterian of New Brunswick in 1935. It's appealed to the General Assembly of 1936. The Assembly upholds that appeal. Upholds the verdict of the Presbytery. So Machen then starts with other conservatives again, starts the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, June 11th, 1936, the 14th birthday of my father, who was born on June 11th too.